Where Keaton lived, if you helped a blind person across the street.
No one expected him to speak again. Not after the scandals. Not after the silence that wrapped itself around his name like fog. But when Diane Keaton passed away in October 2025, something inside Woody Allen cracked. The man who built his legacy on irony and detachment suddenly sounded human. At 89, with the world no longer listening, he finally started to speak, not in scripts or quips, but in raw, unfiltered truth. And what he said revealed more than decades of interviews ever had. He spoke of Diane not as a co-star or muse, but as the woman who once saw him fully, before the headlines, before the courtrooms, before the shame. Her absence didn't just hurt, it hollowed him. The woman who once laughed through his worst neuroses was gone, and with her, the last real part of his youth. What emerged from his grief was a confession buried for over half a century. A confession not of guilt, but of lost love, of control disguised as affection, of closeness disguised as ownership. But to understand how deep this regret runs, we have to go back to where it all began. Long before Annie Hall, before Manhattan, before fame twisted the truth. The audition that changed his life. It started on a dimly lit Broadway stage in 1969. Woody Allen, already known for his neurotic humor, was casting for a play called Play It Again, Sam at the Morosco Theater. He was 33, successful, awkward, and famously unsure of himself, especially around women. Then a 23-year-old Diane Keaton walked in, wearing mismatched clothes, no makeup, and an energy that made the entire room feel less rehearsed. She wasn't conventional. She wasn't trying. And that's exactly why he couldn't look away. Allen would later write that meeting her made him question his own sanity. Was it possible to fall in love that quickly, he asked. Her reading was bold, funny, utterly unfiltered. She got the role instantly. Within weeks, she was in his apartment. Within months, she was in his life. Their relationship wasn't polished. It was eccentric, odd, magnetic. He was the tightly wound intellectual from Brooklyn. She was the breezy California girl who wore men's shirts and didn't care what critics thought. He found that chaos intoxicating. But as we'll soon see, chaos doesn't sit quietly for long. Chaos versus control, the relationship that couldn't breathe. At first, their differences felt like balance. Woody admired Diane's wildness, her ability to laugh loudly, dress freely, live without apology, but admiration slowly turned into discomfort. She was too spontaneous, too unpredictable, too much for a man who found comfort in routines and punctuation. And so, quietly, the shaping began. Woody would correct her grammar mid-sentence, recommend books he believed she should read, even suggest what to wear before they left the apartment. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel. It was control disguised as concern. But Diane Keaton had her own quiet rebellion. When he corrected her, she'd say the wrong word again on purpose. When he gave her books, she'd toss them aside for photography magazines. When he urged her to dress a certain way, she'd walk out in something even bolder. And yet, he loved her more for it. That unshakable refusal to bend. But the very thing that drew him in, the chaos he adored, was the very thing he kept trying to contain. For Woody, control felt like safety. For Diane, it felt like suffocation. And love, when bound too tightly, begins to fray, especially when the spotlight starts to shift. The Godfather shift, when Diane became her own star. In 1972, everything changed. Diane was offered the role of Kay Adams in The Godfather. Woody scoffed. A gangster film. That wasn't her style, he said, but she took the role anyway. And when she came back, she was different. She had worked with Coppola, Brando, Pacino, the giants of cinema. And she returned not as Woody's whimsical girlfriend, but as a woman who now knew her worth. She was no longer someone to be molded. She was her own story. Woody didn't know what to do with that. For a man who needed creative control like air, watching Diane slip beyond his reach felt like emotional freefall. They broke up later that year. There were no big fights, no screaming, just a quiet collapse of something that had never fully fit. But even after she walked out of his apartment, she never left his imagination. He carried her into every scene, every draft, every unfinished sentence. And 5 years later, he did something most people could never do. He turned his heartbreak into an Oscar. Annie Hall turning regret into an Oscar. In 1977, Woody Allen released what many would call his masterpiece, Annie Hall, but this wasn't fiction. It was Diane Keaton barely disguised. Annie had been her real-life nickname. Hall was her birth surname. The clothes, not from costume designers. They came straight from Diane's closet. The slouchy pants, the ties, the men's vests, they were hers. Every awkward dinner, every long pause, every beautifully painful breakup, straight from their relationship. But while the world saw Annie Hall as a quirky love story, Diane saw it as a mirror she hadn't asked to look into. Scene by scene, she was reliving the very love story that had left her bruised. And she did it under the direction of the man who once tried to own her. The public adored it. Critics raved. Awards poured in. Annie Hall won Best Picture. Woody won Best Director. And Diane Keaton won Best Actress. On stage, she glowed. But backstage, those who knew her said she was shaking. That Oscar wasn't just a win. It was a wound. Because that film wasn't a tribute, it was a cinematic goodbye. And the pain, buried beneath the humor, was real. But Diane was never fully written out of his life. Not even close. Haunted by a ghost, the muse who never left. After Annie Hall, their romance was over. But Woody couldn't let go. Diane kept returning, not just in his thoughts, but in his scripts. In 1978's Interiors. In Manhattan. In characters who looked like her, dressed like her, spoke like her. Friends began to whisper about it. No matter who Woody dated, no matter who he cast, Diane Keaton lingered like a melody he couldn't stop humming. In public, they moved on. She became a star on her own terms. Red's baby boom, father of the bride. Her warmth, her eccentricity, her charm, it was all hers now. Meanwhile, Woody's films grew more somber, more inward, more lost. And yet, every few years, like clockwork, Diane would reappear in his creative world, as if her presence was the compass he couldn't replace. Because she wasn't just his past, she was his benchmark. The spark that lit up every frame he shot afterward was a reflection of the one woman he could never fully understand and never fully forget. But when the scandals hit, when the world turned on him, it was Diane who made the most unexpected return of all. The 1992 collapse, scandal, silence, and the one who stayed. Then came the storm no one could ignore. In 1992, Woody Allen's private life exploded into public chaos. His custody battle with Mia Farrow became a national headline, filled with accusations, betrayal, and a relationship with Mia's adopted daughter, Soon-Yi, that stunned even his closest friends. The man once hailed as a genius was now the subject of late-night ridicule and front-page disgust. Studios distanced themselves. Actors backed away. His name, once whispered with reverence, became a cautionary tale. But one voice didn't leave: Diane Keaton. In 1993, Woody was casting Manhattan Murder Mystery. Originally, the role was Mia's. But after everything collapsed, Woody made a call. Diane picked up. Without drama, without judgment, she stepped in. They hadn't worked together in decades, but when they reunited on set, something clicked. Their chemistry hadn't faded, their timing still danced. It wasn't romantic, it was something quieter, a kind of emotional truce. For Woody, that call saved him professionally and personally. For Diane, it wasn't about saving anyone. It was about showing up for someone she once loved and still respected. In a town where loyalty is rare, Diane Keaton made it look simple. But in the years that followed, that loyalty would cost her more than anyone expected. Loyalty under fire, the tweet that sparked a firestorm. In 2018, as the Me Too movement reshaped Hollywood, old stories resurfaced. And once again, Woody Allen's name was at the center. Dylan Farrow's accusations echoed louder. Actors who had once idolized him now denounced him. Film festivals distanced themselves. Streaming platforms quietly walked away. The industry was erasing him in real time. Then Diane Keaton tweeted, just 13 words, "Woody Allen is my friend and I continue to believe him." She added a link to a decades-old interview where Woody defended himself. And with that, the backlash hit her like a wave. Casting directors stopped calling. Roles vanished. Colleagues unfollowed. The internet labeled her everything from blind to complicit. But Diane didn't flinch. No deletion, no clarification, no PR cleanup. She didn't speak for attention. She didn't even speak often. She spoke for someone she had known for 50 years, not as a symbol, but as a human. Sources close to her said it wasn't about defending his actions. It was about refusing to rewrite her truth just because the crowd demanded it. In a city that rewards silence, Diane chose something more costly, conviction, and Woody, he never forgot. She believed in me when no one else would, he told a friend. I never asked her to, she just did. Diane's death and Woody's breaking point. By 2025, both of them had faded from the spotlight. Diane Keaton was appearing less and less in public. She skipped interviews, canceled events. Friends whispered about her health, but she never said a word. Even those closest to her were left guessing. And then on October 11, 2025, the news broke like a wave that silenced the room. Diane Keaton had passed away at 79. The cause wasn't disclosed, only that it had been sudden. The tributes came fast, but no one, not even her fans, felt it as deeply as Woody Allen. For years, he had spoken in riddles and witticisms. Now he was silent. Friends said he was stunned, fragile, gutted in a way he didn't know how to hide. At her small, private funeral in Los Angeles, he arrived moving slowly, clutching an old photograph of them from 1970, laughing together on the set of Play It Again, Sam. Witnesses said he wept through the entire service. 2 days later, Woody did something he hadn't done in decades. He wrote. In an essay for the Free Press, he shared his memories of her. She was so magical, he wrote, so original, so Diane. He called her a genius, a mirror, a muse, but more than that, he wrote with regret, the kind that lives too long and arrives too late. The final confession, love, regret, and the mirror that never broke. Behind closed doors, Woody Allen said the words he'd never dared before. To friends, he admitted what he had hidden even from himself. I didn't just love her, he said. I tried to own her, and that wasn't love, that was fear. In losing Diane, he realized he hadn't just lost a person, he had lost his mirror. The only one who ever saw through the artist, the celebrity, the neurotic punchline, and loved the insecure boy beneath it all. She gave me everything, he whispered to a friend. The films, the magic, the soul of my work. Without her, I was just a man writing nervous comedies. With her, I was telling the truth. He still keeps that same photograph nearby, the one of them laughing in 1970. He said to look at it every morning now, not out of nostalgia, but out of something deeper, remorse, gratitude, and the ache of knowing that he should have let her be. In the end, Diane Keaton was more than his muse. She was his redemption, his truth, his final unsolvable riddle. Their love story never had a proper ending, no final scene, no last kiss, just a lifetime of echoes through films, through letters, through silence. And maybe that's what makes it unforgettable.